Okay, so this was the last session of our Global Perspective program. I hope you enjoyed it with some really interesting perspective coming from Israel, the Middle East, and Russia for the past 30 minutes. Now we're going to have something completely different with a workshop with Carmine Gallo that you might have seen on the main stage, and he's now continuing his presentation on a deeper with a deeper perspective on his workshop. So please help me welcome Carmine Gallo for the 3 Unbreakable Laws of Communication workshop. Yeah, Carmine, one question before you start. What will be the main difference between this next hour and what you did on the main stage?
How many of you attended my talk just a few minutes ago? Good, great. So this is a select group of people who want to learn more about communication. So Cedric, you asked what the difference is. The difference primarily is going to be that we're going to take a much deeper dive into some of the techniques that I talked about today. It will not be presented in the same way. It's not divided the same way. But I'd like to talk to you about the new rules that I see that all persuasive presentations share. So you could take notes today and say, these are the components that I should have in my very next presentation if I want it to be inspiring, understandable, and connect with people. So I promise, let's get out for lunch too. So I'll get you out for lunch.
Okay, very clear. And if you missed the presentation, don't forget you'll be able to see it on YouTube, I think, tonight. So Carmine, and you will be able to ask some questions at the end. Carmine, I'll let you continue.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much for coming to the workshop. I know that anybody who comes to a workshop during LeWeb is very focused on learning something very specific. So I am going to make an assumption. I assume that most of you in the audience are entrepreneurs or you give presentations quite frequently. How many of you give PowerPoint presentations a lot? Good, great. Now I'm curious, out of all of you, how many of you give keynote presentations instead of PowerPoint? Okay. Not bad. Today is not about the difference between PowerPoint and Keynote, by the way. I think if you use PowerPoint, you can create magnificent presentations. I happen to like Keynote for just a couple of very special things. But for 99% of what you do, PowerPoint is perfectly appropriate. So I am going to present you with techniques, concepts that work in every presentation. And they work really, really well. I think most of what I talk about today, you will be able to apply immediately. There might be 10 or 20% of it that maybe doesn't apply to you. Or perhaps you're already doing it. Great. But if you can learn just one thing new, I think it'll take your presentations to the next level. So shall we begin? I wrote The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. And a lot of people asked me at the time, you seem really fascinated with, you seem obsessed with Steve Jobs. And I said, you know, that's a good question. I'm not obsessed with Steve Jobs as much as I'm obsessed with really good communication. So my new book, which I've spent a year working on, is called Talk Like TED. Steve Jobs actually gave very TED-like presentations. TED, as you know, has its own style. But I think the reason why we have to start looking at this style is because, like it or not, your presentation is being compared to TED. Your presentation is being compared to Steve Jobs. The video is out there. TED presentations have been viewed more than 1 billion times. So people look at those presentations and they know what they like. Then they watch somebody else's presentation and they know what they don't like, but they can't tell you. So I'm going to tell you the difference today. If you want to join me and continue the conversation, join my list, and that's also my hashtag on Twitter, by the way. So it's very easy to get a hold of me. I can't stand it when people talk or, you know, that they have books or authors, and You can't find a contact for them anywhere. So it's real easy to contact me. I love this quote by Richard Branson. Entrepreneurs must come prepared. Don't practice your elevator pitch, practice your anywhere pitch. How can you pitch yourself anywhere? Let me give you some very specific techniques. All of you who saw my talk this morning realize that I'm really big on passion. Passion is everything. You cannot inspire people unless you're inspired about the topic. Let me go a little deeper into what that means. I just barely touched on it this morning, but it's so important we need to focus on it. I want to let you watch a piece of video. This is video from Steve Jobs delivering an internal staff meeting in 1997. It's black and white, and you can tell Steve Jobs is very informal. It's just a small staff meeting. But listen to the role that passion would play in revitalizing the Apple brand. Passion was very important to him, but I love the way he articulates it. So listen to what he had to say.
This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. And we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us. Our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for. Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value, is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe.
I love that. People with passion can change the world for the better. So people always ask me, what was the secret behind Steve Jobs' charisma? I would say it's the same with any inspiring speaker. They are incredibly passionate and connected to the topic. Now let's talk about techniques. What does that mean to be connected to a topic? Passion doesn't mean... How many of you saw Ramon this morning, De Leon? Is he passionate? He's passionate. Does that mean that if you don't act like that in front of your client, that you're not passionate? No, it's a different style. But passion comes in many, many forms. Here is what I've discovered about transmitting your passion through a presentation. And I learned it from Howard Schultz. I mentioned this briefly this morning. Howard Schultz taught me that you need to be passionate about what the product means to your customers, what the product means to your employees. It's not about the product. You have to think one step deeper. You're not pitching a product. You're pitching how that product is going to change somebody's life. And that's typically what you're passionate about. Steve Jobs was not passionate about hardware. He was passionate about creating tools that would help people unleash their creativity. Howard Schultz is not passionate about coffee. When I interviewed him, he did not mention the word coffee. A few months later, he was interviewed on CNBC, our business television network. Listen to the way he talks about his brand in this next clip and watch the reaction of the host, who had exactly the same reaction I did when I interviewed Howard Schultz. Why aren't you talking about coffee? Listen.
Starbucks, in a sense, has become the quintessential experience brand, and the experience comes to life by our people. We've been able to, I think, create a system of attracting, retaining great people, building a training system that replicates what we do. And I think the only competitive advantage, and this is, an anathema compared to a tech company, is we have no patent. We have no secret sauce whatsoever. The only competitive advantage we have is the relationship we've built with our people and the relationship they have built with the customer. So when we go to...
You mentioned competitive advantage. You haven't mentioned the word coffee.
Not
So
yet.
your competitive advantage is not your coffee.
Well, I'll get to the...
But you just said your competitive advantage, I agree with you, is the relationship with your people and the people with their with the customer.
And in fact, if you ask me what business we're in the people business. We're not in the coffee business. Of course we are as a product, but we're in the people business. 135,000 people hiring 300 people a day, serving 40 million customers a week. It's all human connection. It's a sense of humanity and the sense of community that we built in our stores. So at the end of the day, what we've been able to do is crack the code on being able to create an environment where people are treated well, they're respected, they're valued. Customers come in and they recognize this is a different kind of environment, almost an oasis.
Almost an oasis. Is he talking about coffee, or is he talking about something much more than that? He's an inspiring speaker. Ask yourself, what am I passionate about? Another way of asking this question is, what business am I in? I loved that last clip because Howard Schultz said, yeah, coffee is what we sell as a product, but that's not the business that I'm in. So ask yourself either, what am I passionate about, or what business am I in? And make sure that that comes across in your presentation. And now let me get into some very specific techniques that will help you create a presentation that is emotional, interesting, novel, and memorable. The first technique that works every time, I call it creating a Twitter-friendly headline. Twitter, in our language, in English, is 140 characters. I know the character has changed a little bit. It's 140 characters. Can you get your idea across in one sentence of 140 characters? Can you do that? Because a lot of great communicators can do that. There's a reason for it. The brain craves meaning before detail. A scientist taught me this. He said, Carmine, when primitive man evolved, when the brain evolved, primitive man did not ask, how many teeth does a tiger have? He asked, will it eat me? Should I run? The brain needs the big picture before details. Let me give you an example from Apple. I will use a lot of presentations from Apple and Steve Jobs because they thought this through. They do this really, really well. It's okay to copy them to an extent. They know how to communicate. And they copied other people and other brands. So these are all just best lessons. In 2008, Steve Jobs introduces the MacBook Air for the first time. This is how a typical presenter would deliver a slide about the MacBook Air. They would say, we're very excited to introduce a thin, lightweight notebook computer, 13-inch widescreen display, backlit keyboard, Intel processor. Would anybody disagree that this is the typical presentation? Okay, what did Steve do? Oh, it's the world's thinnest notebook. You need to know the big picture before the details. Do you also see what he did to the slide? What do you notice about the slide? It's very visual, isn't it? When he delivers the headline, the one thing that you should know about the product, that's all you see. That's all you're supposed to see on the slide. This works really, really well. Apple always thinks about the one thing, the headline that they want you to remember. iPhone 5S came out a few months ago, right? 5S. In the presentation, Tim Cook said it's our most forward-thinking product, our most forward-thinking iPhone. That's what he said. He had, I don't have the slide, but he had a slide. iPhone 5S, the most forward-thinking iPhone. Go to the website, the most forward-thinking iPhone. Here's why it works. Because it frames the product in your mind. They are telling you how they want you to talk about the product. And here you go. As soon as that product came out, BBC, the most forward-thinking phone Apple's ever created. USA Today, Apple's Phil Schiller, the most forward-thinking phone that perhaps anyone has ever made. People don't even equate the quote. They just connect USA Today calls the iPhone forward-thinking. Did they make that up? They didn't make it up. Apple tells you what they want you to say. But you need to see the big picture first, and it needs to be short. The most forward-thinking phone, that's 140 characters. I want to introduce you to somebody. This gentleman right here on the left, or on your left, is very important to your life. His name is Eli Harari. Eli Harari started a company called SanDisk. All of those digital cameras you're using that take MP3 cards, they want me to stay in the light. It's cooler over here. I've got to stay here? Okay, I'm good. All of those, the MP3 cards, not the MP3 cards, but the memory cards that go in your phones. Thank you, Eli. He pioneered that. The memory that goes into your tablet, he pioneered that. I was having a meeting with Eli and his top engineers, and we were trying to figure out what was the theme that we were going to get across during an analyst conference. We were going to schedule a presentation for a group of analysts. And here's what he said. This was his slide. First slide, second slide. In the coming decade, Flash will be bigger than you think. Very simple. In the coming decade, Flash will be bigger than you think. And he was right. This was a few years ago. When I suggested he do that, a bunch of engineers in the room said, oh, that's too simple. We have things that are way too complicated. We're making it too simple. People will push back on you. They will push you down because they say you're making it too simple. Okay, Eli, thankfully, went along with it because he said, you know, let's keep it simple because we want to engage people and keep people going. What's the headline from one of the first business articles? SanDisk Flash will be bigger than you think. Did he come up with that? No, we did. We told him what to write, how to create the headline, because people want the big picture. Give them the big picture. Richard Branson taught me something too. He said, Carmine, I get pitched all the time. All the time. Every day I get pitched. Because, you know, Virgin Group has like 400 companies. He said, if you cannot explain what you do, your campaign, your product, what you want from me, if you cannot explain it on the back of an envelope, I'm not interested. Keep it short. How do I pitch my idea in 140 characters or less? It's a very good technique, and it works really, really well. So think about that. Here's another technique for your presentations. Make sure that after you give me the big picture, okay, the one that explains the product, the second thing you need to do is help me understand why I need the product, why I need your idea. What's the problem? All great movies have a hero and a villain. A presentation has a hero and a villain too. When Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone in 2007, the villain was Apple's competitors, the current smartphones on the market. So the way Steve Jobs would handle it is he would spend 2 minutes talking about the problem before introducing the solution. That is a fabulous technique. Problem, solution. It works really, really well. Because if you deliver the solution first, people are scratching their heads thinking, okay, it's cool, but how does it fix a problem that I have? Here's Steve Jobs talking about a problem that you had. The genius of Steve Jobs, and we can't all do this very well, the genius of Steve Jobs is he could tell us about a problem we didn't even know we had. And he did it very, very well. This is how he did it. Watch.
Revolutionary user interface. I mean, here's 4 smartphones, right? Motorola Q, the BlackBerry, Palm Treo, Nokia E62, the usual suspects. And what's wrong with their user interfaces? Well, the problem with them is really sort of in the bottom 40 there.
Sure.
It's this stuff right here. They all have these keyboards that are there whether you need them or not to be there. And they all have these control buttons that are fixed in plastic. and are the same for every application. Well, every application wants a slightly different user interface, a slightly optimized set of buttons just for it. And what happens if you think of a great idea 6 months from now? You can't run around and add a button to these things. They're already shipped. So what do? It doesn't work because the buttons and the controls can't change. They can't change for each application, and they can't change down the road if you think of another great idea you want to add to this product. Well, how do you solve this? It turns out we have solved it. We solved it in computers 20 years ago. We solved it with a bitmap screen that could display anything we want, put any user interface up, and a pointing device. We solved it with the mouse, right? We solved this problem. So how are we going to take this to a mobile device? Well, what we're going to do is get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen. A giant screen. Now, how are we going to communicate this? We don't want to carry around a mouse, right? So what are we going to do? Oh, a stylus, right? We're going to use a stylus. No. No. Who wants a stylus? You have to get them and put them away and you lose them. Yuck. Nobody wants a stylus. So let's not use a stylus. We're going to use the best pointing device in the world. We're going to use a pointing device that we're all born with. We're born with 10 of them. We're going to use our fingers. We're going to touch this with our fingers. And we have invented a new technology called multi-touch, which is phenomenal. It works like magic. You don't need a stylus. It's far more accurate than any touch display that's ever been shipped. It ignores unintended touches. It's super smart. You can do multi-finger gestures on it. And boy, have we patented it. So,
okay, let's keep it there. Keep it there. I want to point something out. You see what that slide looks like? There were never any bullet points on a Steve Jobs slide. No bullet points at all. But he did have lists. What he would do is give the device or the picture on the left and the words on the right. That's not a bad way of creating lists. Remember I talked this morning about picture superiority? It's always better to have a picture and words instead of just words alone. By the way, they keep telling me to stay in the middle. They are asking an Italian not to move. I can't do that, but I'll stay here. I'll stay here. I want to go over here. I'll stay with you. I'll give you a little love here. So ask yourself, what problem do you want to solve? What is the problem before the solution? And then you can offer your solution. And make sure that when you do, you're selling the benefit. Your audience only has one question. Why do I care? How is that going to improve my life? Why should I care about your idea or your product or your solution? Audiences are very simple. Very simple. They just want to know, why should I care? Are you going to save me money, make me money, help my career? What are you going to do? Sometimes it takes people 10 minutes to figure out how your conversation is going to help them. I do a lot of work with Intel. Most of your computers have Intel inside. I go through this process all the time, especially with engineers. Let me read you something. When Intel came out with a new chip a few years ago, it's a dual-core chip, which doesn't mean much to most people. When I asked the engineers what it did, they said, Carmine, a dual-core chip has 2 performance engines that simultaneously process data at a faster rate. I said, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't care. Why do I care? So they changed the conversation around. They said, well, you should care because if you buy a computer with an Intel chip inside, it'll last longer on a single charge, up to 12 hours of battery life. Videos will look stunning, and all of your applications will work much faster. You'll be much more productive. So what's more interesting to you? What I just said or the previous explanation? The only difference was, by the way, what I just told you is the same thing. It's the same thing. The difference is I answer the question, who cares? Why should you care? Why should my audience care? Always ask yourself that question. I'm a trained journalist. When I went to graduate school in journalism, that's the first thing we learned. When you're writing a story, why should the reader care? Remember today I also talked about the rule of 3. I want to get into this just a little bit more. For those of you who weren't at my talk this morning, the rule of 3 simply means that in short-term memory, I can only carry about 3 big ideas. Don't tell me 22 reasons why I should invest with you. Give me 3. Steve Jobs used to do this brilliantly. Again, I'm going back to Steve Jobs because he did all this. He would give you 3 features, 3 products. I saw the rule of 3. Well, here's another example from Apple. It's thinner, lighter, faster. I love that one. iPad 2. What do you need to know about it? It's thinner, it's lighter, it's faster. That's it. If that's all you know, it teaches you a lot. I was going to say I was really fascinated with the rule of 3 throughout much of the presentations that I saw on the web. George Colony from Forrester Research talked about the rule of 3. How many of you watched Wilson, the VC from Union Square Venture, Fred Wilson? How many of you saw Fred? Do you remember what he did? He gave you 3 megatrends, and within each megatrend, he gave you 3 examples. A lot of people naturally think in 3s. A few months ago, Twitter went IPO. It was one of the most successful technology IPOs of all time. I wrote a column for Forbes. I broke down their presentations. These are real slides from the Twitter IPO. What do you notice? 3 things. Simple slides. Dick Costolo, the CEO, delivered this slide. Global reach and engagement. So he wanted to tell you about their global reach. What is that, mobile average users, or I think that is. I forgot what those are. But he divided everything into 3. This is a better slide. This is a blow up. So there it is. He said we had 230 million mobile active users every month. 77% were international, 76% access Twitter on mobile. The point was he was making the business case for Twitter. 3 reasons. 3 reasons why you should back Twitter. Twitter's IPO was one of the most successful on record. If it's good enough for Twitter, it's good enough for the rest of us. This is a really simple way of delivering information. Here's another slide from the same presentation. The CFO said there's 3 key metrics we want you to know. Stick to the rule of 3. The rule of 3 is very powerful. Divide up your presentation into 3. If you have a 30-second pitch here at LeWeb and you want to talk about your product or your idea in 30 seconds, give people 3 examples or 3 reasons. It's very effective. The rule of 3 is probably my favorite communication technique. We're doing good on time. Let me give you some other techniques that you can use today. This is also very important. When you deliver statistics, numbers, make sure you put those numbers in a context that people can understand. Most people don't do this. Most presenters just throw out big numbers as if we're supposed to care. Take those numbers and put them into context. Let me give you an example. Steve Jobs was brilliant at this. In 2001, when he introduced the iPhone for the first time, or the iPod, it was 5 gigabytes of storage. It means nothing to anybody. Nobody cares. Oh, but 5 gigabytes was the equivalent of 1,000 songs. Oh, well, that's more interesting. That's a lot more interesting. Oh, but I've got one better, he said. It's 1,000 songs in your pocket. Now it's interesting. That's why he was a communication genius. He didn't just give you big numbers. Apple continues to do this. It's a technique. It's a technique that anybody can use. Apple does this to this day. They introduced the iPad Air, the iPad Mini. I guess now it's all called iPad Air. But remember, it was the iPad Mini when they introduced the iPad Mini last year. This is from that presentation. I don't remember how thin it is. They gave us numbers. I don't remember what the numbers are, but I do remember it's as thin as a pencil. I do remember it's as light as a pad of paper. Apple's brilliant at doing this. They never introduce a statistic without putting it into some sort of context. Here's the actual video of how it sounded.
Mini is just 7.2 millimeters thin. That's about a quarter thinner than the 4th generation iPad. To put it in context, it's as thin as a pencil. That's thin. It weighs just 0.68 pounds. That's over 50% lighter than the previous iPad, 4th generation. So in context, what can you compare that to? It's as light as a pad of paper. We were going to say a book, but books are much heavier. So we came out with a pad of paper.
What do you think? Isn't that interesting? Isn't that so much more memorable than the numbers? You won't remember the numbers, but you will remember the pencil and the pad of paper. So ask yourself, what statistics do I have to deliver in my next picture presentation, and how do I bring those to life? Let me give the people with a microphone a heads up. In a couple I'm going to go through one more technique, and then I want to take questions so we can wrap up some Q&A, and then everybody can go out and enjoy a nice lunch outside, okay? Does that sound good? This is, again, a very important technique that you need to understand because this is happening. When you watch a TED presentation, how many of you have seen a TED presentations? Great. Have you seen any traditional PowerPoint or bullet points on any TED presentations? Doesn't work that way, does it? Doesn't mean they don't use PowerPoint. Many do. But again, it's a different way of looking at information, a visual way of describing information. Pictures instead of words. The typical PowerPoint slide looks something like this, doesn't it? People like to use a lot of colors, so you can't even read them. And they like to use small fonts, and they love bullet points. The more bullet points, the better. And then sub-bullet points. They like clip art, and people hate open space. Designers love space. Most presenters, they don't like open space on their slide. So they have to fill every part of that slide. So let's add a chart. Let's add a line up there. And pretty soon you got a really ugly slide. Now, when I created this, I thought it was really ugly. And then I saw this. That's a real slide. That's horrifying. That's really scary. We have an organization in America called the NSA. You may have heard about. They like to spy on people. This is actually one of their slides. It was top secret until the New York Times got a hold of it. And this is what it looks like. How anything gets, I think the problem with the NSA is too much data. They have so much data. They're capturing our data and they're putting data on the PowerPoint slides. That's very typical. This is very typical. The average PowerPoint slide has 40 words. Those had about 400, by the way. But I can understand. I saw this statistic and I thought, yeah, I could believe that. 40 words. It was difficult to find 40 words on 10 slides of a Steve Jobs presentation. So what does that tell you? They do that to this day. It's difficult to find 40 words in 10 of Tim Cook's presentations. Let's go back to Twitter. Very few words. Pictures and words. So here, the CEO was talking about all of the different uses of Twitter. Why should he just put words on there? Pictures and words. That's the magic secret. That's the magic formula. Pictures and words. Some of you may remember this slide that I had created for me. It's a beautiful slide. If I deliver information verbally, you'll remember 10% of what I tell you. If I add a picture, you'll retain 65%. Guarantee that if somebody at the end of this conference asks you, yeah, you know that workshop with Carmine Gallo, how much meaning does a picture add? How much of the information will you remember by adding a picture? Most of you will be able to remember 65%. Not because I told you, but because you'll remember the image that reinforced the data. Pictures and data, pictures and text. That's the magic formula. A scientist taught me this, which is very interesting. I never knew this. When the brain detects, when your eyeball detects a letter on a page, it actually interprets it as a picture. The eye interprets letters as images. That's why when you put too many words, like we saw on those slides, you literally choke the brain on text. Now, some of you may ask, how can you read if it's all coming at you as pictures? Well, try reading and try listening and comprehending to somebody at the same time. You can't do both. Isn't that what we ask of people when we deliver a really cluttered PowerPoint? You're asking me, or I'm asking the audience to listen to me and to read something as well. You can't do that. So why do we continue to do that? A new method, a new, fresh perspective is what we need. So stop thinking in terms of words, start thinking visually. Let's go back to the MacBook Air, and I'll end on this. MacBook Air. I created this beautiful slide to show you an example of how most people would create a slide around a new product. Do you like this slide? Is it a pretty slide? Is it a memorable slide? No? Too many words. I tried to make it pretty. I have a little cartoon there of a battery. No, that's not enough. I tried to space it around a little bit, use different colors. That's not enough. How about this? Would you remember this slide? The MacBook Air was so thin, it fit in an envelope. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to know. You could walk into a store and say, yeah, I want that computer that was so thin. You know, he showed it with the envelope. Picture superiority. Think visually. Think visually. It's a very powerful technique. We have about 10 minutes left. Would you like to take some questions? If there are any questions from the audience, I'd love to hear from you. Anything about pitching yourself, pitching your ideas, developing better PowerPoint presentations, now's your chance, and we'll go enjoy a nice lunch. All of you came out? There's no, okay, here we go. If you can give me your name too.
Good morning, I'm Arnaud. Very inspiring presentation. I have a quick question. By simplifying your message too much, do you not fear that you are going to lose information?
Okay, the question was, by simplifying too much, do you lose information? It takes creativity to condense. Marissa Mayer said this once, the CEO of Yahoo. She said it's remarkable how much creativity it takes to keep things simple. There's an entire book on it as well, by an author who I know. But what he talks about is this fact. It seems counterintuitive, but the fact is that when you really try to keep things simpler, more condensed, easier to understand, it's harder to do. It's hard to do, and it takes more creativity. But the story that emerges is much more interesting and much more persuasive. Simplifying is very important. And when you talk to other people, especially scientists or engineers, you try to get this across, you're going to hit a wall. It's very hard for them to understand this. But those who do end up delivering better presentations, more interesting presentations, and elevating their careers. I was working with somebody from Cisco Systems, 80,000 people within Cisco, mid-level manager. He started using these techniques about 2 years ago. Started using these techniques. Now he's an evangelist. They ask him to deliver presentations all over the world. Why? Because they say, you can do it more simple. We like your presentations. They're simple. Customers like it. So it's very important. And now his stature is being elevated. That's what I said today. The point of this morning's talk was that the ability to present well and communicate well could very well be the single greatest skill that will help your career. But you can't be afraid to simplify. That's a great question. It gets to the heart of everything, simplification. Yes, sir.
Is it working? Yeah. I'm Alexander. Hi, thank you very much for the presentation and for your workshop. Would you agree that good managers also integrate, these kind of techniques in their daily management style? For example, Jack Welch, had very inspirational stories all the time. Do they use the same techniques? And if so, how can you integrate it basically in your functioning on a day-to-day basis? Not only presentations, but also managing business.
Just last week in Silicon Valley, I worked with a woman who's a very high level at one of the biggest companies in the world, a company that touches your life every day. Her issue was that now this particular company has a new executive C-suite, new president, new CEO, and she has to go in there and pitch ideas all the time. So she wanted to know, how am I going to communicate with these C-level people? So she's using all these techniques in the same way. She may not be delivering a PowerPoint, but she needs to get across the one thing you need to know. So for example, they may ask her, how is this particular campaign going? How is it going? Give us a status report. Okay, here's the one thing you need to know about our status, and here are 3 examples of how it's going. So she's still using all of this for her own internal career outside of a PowerPoint. Communication is communication. You can use PowerPoint to complement your communication, but everything we've talked about still applies to an elevator pitch or to a conversation that you and I have. Everything still applies.
Hello, I'm Muriel Blanc.
Hello.
This morning you told us about the length of the speech, and you told us it has to be maximum 15, 20 minutes. It's a bit complicated for some CEO, for example, to explain a big strategy in this very short time.
Perfect. Great question. Good. How many of you remember when I said 20 minutes is the ideal length of time for a talk? 20 minutes. That's true. Science shows, I'm not making it up, science shows that the person's attention span is only 10 to 20 minutes. After that, no matter how engaging you are, people start to lose attention. By this time, even if some of you have enjoyed my presentation, by this time you know what you're thinking? Yeah, I want to go to lunch. They got some good wine and cheese outside. It's time to go to lunch. Yeah, he's interesting, but let's go to lunch. Your brain is automatically starting to be distracted. So, ma'am, this is what we do. This is the technique that you need to do. First, you need to acknowledge that. The brain will get bored after 10 to 20 minutes, no matter who you are. President Obama could be speaking in my country, whatever. Most charismatic person can be speaking. 20 minutes, you're ready to shut it off. So what do we say to your CEO? What do we say to business leaders? That does not mean you cannot give a 2 or 3 hour workshop or an explanation. Break it up every 10 minutes. Break it up. Give the brain something different. Add a second speaker, a different speaker. Let's say I've been talking for 10 minutes about my new product. Exactly 10 minutes, I speak, and then I say, now I want to introduce you to the designer of our new product. You're re-engaged. Now the clock starts again. Now you've got another 10 minutes. The designer comes off. Hey, that was wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Designer. Now we're going to show you some video of our customers using our product. Let's watch the video. Re-engaged. People are re-engaged again. You got another, you just bought another 10 minutes. It's something that was very hard for me to get across in the very limited amount of time I had this morning. But the point is, what I'm trying to say is, of course you have to speak more than 10 or 20 minutes. It's what I'm doing here. But you try to break up the content as much as possible to give people a break. Whatever you do, don't be the only person to deliver a PowerPoint for more than 20 minutes. No video, no distractions, even questions and answers, anything to break it up. Otherwise, guaranteed, because it's just natural, guaranteed they will start looking around for something else. They will stop listening to you. No matter how engaging you are, we have found, research has found, they will stop. So it's very important to keep in mind. Great question.
Yeah, hi. This is Pablo Garcia from Softonic, Spain.
Hi.
You were talking about having the visual aid, but let's say you don't have that support. Let's say that you are in an actual 30-second speech, elevator pitch. How do you compensate that?
30-second elevator pitch is a little different story. When I talk about think visually, the visual aid, I only say that because most of you use PowerPoint. So I wanted to make sure that those of you who do use PowerPoint think more visually. Text is better than words, or text and words, but not just a bunch of slides with words alone. Now, you mentioned the 30-second elevator pitch. 30-second elevator pitch, I can still paint a mental picture for you. And I can use that through the examples I use. So if I use very tangible example in the elevator pitch, at least you will have a visual representation of what you're trying to say. So just think visually, even when you're not using visuals. What example can I use that would bring it to life, that would paint a mental picture in your head? Oh, by the way, what we just did here is a perfect 30-second elevator pitch. Perfect. The big picture first, followed by 3 reasons or 3 examples to support the big picture. Once you do that, that's the perfect 30-second elevator pitch. It works really well. How about one more question? Here's one here. Hello, sir.
Hello, Eric.
Eric?
Could you give us some advice on body language? I noticed you use a lot your body when you speak.
Body language. It's because I'm Italian. It's easy for me to use a lot of body when I speak. Body language is actually very important. There are a few things that most people, body language, we could sit here and talk for 2 hours. Let me wrap it up with this. There are a few things that most people do that detracts from their presence as a leader. There's a few things that most people do. And if you could just correct these, you'll come across much better in terms of your body language. One, when you are delivering a PowerPoint, don't read from the PowerPoint. Most people read the PowerPoint. They turn to the slide and they read all the words on it. Or, if my computer was here, I'd be reading from the PowerPoint. I'm breaking eye contact. So the great presenters, there's a guy named John Chambers who's the CEO of Cisco. He's magnificent. He's one of the most astonishing speakers I've ever seen. Some of his PowerPoints can get kind of wordy, but what he does is he glances at the PowerPoint, and then he looks at people right in the eye, and he makes this incredible eye contact, and he's talking to people. It's like he's looking right at you. Glances at the PowerPoint, delivers it. PowerPoint, deliver. So eye contact is very important. That's number one, eye contact above all else. The second thing that most people fail to do is they don't use their hands. They don't use gestures. It's okay. A long time ago, I think in old-style public speaking, people were taught to speak like this. It's very stiff and it's very formal. If I stood here, they want me to stand in the light. So if I had stood here for this past hour and I talked like this, what impression would it have left on you? Not good. Not good at all. This is how most people present. I'm detached from you. I've got my hands in my pockets. That's a barrier. This is not open. These are what are called open gestures. Hands up, palms to the sky. This is closed. This is the third thing I'm going to tell you. Gestures, use them. This is closed. This is very stiff, very boring. This, stiff, boring. Hands in pockets. John Chambers never has his hand in his pockets, ever. Not once. He'll speak for an hour. He'll do a lot of this. When he has a list, he'll say there's 3 reasons Cisco is going to have a great year. Number 1, number 2, number 3. Big gestures. It shows confidence. When you can work a stage, it shows confidence. When you can use big gestures, people don't even know why they have an impression of you as a confident leader. They can't explain it, but they do. Body language is very important. So those are 3 things that when I work with executives, those tend to be the fundamental flaws. They look down too much, they read too much, they got the hands in the pockets, and they don't use their hands. Outstanding. It's 12:30. They have a wonderful lunch prepared. Thank you very much. Please join my list. Get on my website so we can continue. And I'll be here for lunch in case anybody would like to meet me or talk to me.
Thank you, Carmine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think you put a lot of pressure on the presenters this afternoon that will have to follow all your advice, and I will be the first one to do. So we're back at 2 p.m. with the brands track. So if you're not aware of this part of the program starting this afternoon, so brands or people doing awesome thing for brands will be presenting brands such as Renault, McDonald's. We'll start with Danone and Evian, head of digital. And we'll also have Twitter or social bakers explaining what brands are doing on social media. So we'll be back at 2 p.m. this afternoon, and enjoy your lunch.